Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Facebook and this webinar. Fourth Space, physically located at Concordia, is a university-wide space and platform focused on working collaboratively with our community of students, staff, and faculty across disciplines to create programming that fosters knowledge creation through public engagement. Some months ago, we were very excited to plan an interactive showcase with the 2019-2020 cohort of public scholars in the space. And since that proved impossible for reasons we're all aware of, we are super grateful to the School of Graduate Studies organizers for their flexibility and for adapting today's event to this platform. Thank you to the public scholars who will speak today and to Bettina Forget, who will moderate and lead the question period after the presentations. Attendees, hello, we invite you to post your questions in the Q&A box here in the webinar. It is my pleasure now to pass the mic over to Dr. Faye Diamantoudy, Interim Dean of Graduate Studies, for opening remarks and event moderation. Over to you, Faye.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Faye Diamantoudy. I'm the Interim Dean of Concordia School of Graduate Studies and also a professor of economics. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our discussion today. The Public Scholar Program was created in 2017, so it's not that old, in partnership with the Montreal Gazette to support engagement between our graduate research and the broader community. Every year, 10 exceptional PhD candidates are selected from across Concordia to participate in strategic professional workshops designed to provide them with the skills to effectively communicate and engage with the public. Our 2019-2020 cohort launched in May last year and had been working so hard towards a celebratory in-person event this spring to showcase their journey. Then, unfortunately, everything changed. On Friday, March 13, Concordia, in response to COVID-19 pandemic, closed its doors. Only a few short months from the end of their mandate, the 2019-2020 scholars were faced with redefining not only their roles as public scholars, but as researchers and academics. With labs and libraries closed almost overnight, they, like their peers around the world, had to reassess the path to their goals. Today's discussion is our opportunity to learn how this sudden shift has impacted our graduate students and share ideas about the immediate future of graduate studies. 5 of the 2019 cohort scholars were able to join us live today. The others have offered their perspectives through their blogs and op-eds and can be explored on our website. The link is available in the chat. Altogether, the scholars provide a snapshot of our students' COVID-19 experience and offer ideas that will help Concordia adapt our graduate program resources and philosophies for the new world. Our first public scholar is an architect, a Vanya recipient, a member of numerous graduate student committees, and PhD candidate in the individualized program. Please welcome Sharif Gubran. Sharif.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'll start by giving you a quick overview of my work, and I'll try to discuss some ideas of how it relates to the current crisis. So broadly, I look at green building practices and sustainable development, specifically the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the SDGs, these are 17 goals with 169 targets, cross-cutting across social, environmental, and economic dimensions. And these goals the world has committed for until 2030 to achieve these targets. I'm specifically using the SDGs as a framework for understanding and analyzing how buildings can contribute more meaningfully to our quest for sustainable development. I do this by looking at the real estate markets, its dynamic and forces, which are pushing it towards dealing or addressing long-term sustainability challenges. I look at how building design processes and tools can help us, or how they should be improved in order to accommodate this larger scope. And finally, I look at how buildings, green buildings and recognized buildings have tried to address these broader topics and to understand their successes and failures. So while the pandemic itself presents many risks to all sectors, the building sector included, of course, it didn't directly shift my PhD research focus. However, I do have, of course, some ideas to explore, further ideas that came to as areas for future explorations or current explorations as well. Today, I'll try to present two important aspects, which I think will be key or interesting for our discussion. The first is this kind of tension between, you know, like, is sustainability still a priority with the current health problem or the health, you know, risks that became apparent? Of course, we have to address these emerging health needs and problems, but I think to dislocate the conversation completely from sustainability kind of presents a limited understanding. So in the SDGs, health and well-being has its own goal with several targets that relate to readiness on the national and global level for emergency health risks and emergencies and so on. And so we have to ask whether, in fact, these health problems are completely separate from our sustainability discussion, or are they embedded within it? And we also, from my perspective, I have to also, I think that there is a direct relation between how we build, how we occupy, and how we create spaces, and these the readiness to work to these health problems. We know for a fact there has been a lot of studies that talk about the synergies and trade-offs between how we build our cities and so on, and health. And I think this is a relation that now becomes very important to look further into. The second is this discussion on risks. So there is a lot of discussion on risks now, long-term, short-term, global, local. And in a lot of cases, our focus in sustainability has been really to look at known risks or challenges related to energy, carbon, and so on. These are more global problems or challenges, of course, but there's also some local ones, and these were mainly focused on sites, you know, accessibility, transport, and so on. And these are, of course, important to look at and to mitigate and to work on. But, you know, this crisis is showing us that we have to be more focused on the future, on its possibilities, and you know, at any moment, new risks might emerge. And for me, this is really how designers, who in fact, so building designers in this idea, have to imagine and shape the future. It should be looking at these complex challenges while managing what we know, but also thinking of the unknowns. So things like agility, resilience will be key to thinking of cities in the future. And you know, we have to start asking the more difficult questions of how can buildings contribute to much more than just save energy, you know? So this is just a quick introduction, and I'm sure I'll have the chance to develop further during the discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharif. Our next caller is a PhD candidate in mechanical engineering, specializing in the development of robotics as microsurgical tools. Here to offer his observations on the direct impact of the pandemic on his research and industry, please welcome Amir Molai.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. The topic of my research is on vitreoretinal robotic eye surgery. There are two types of surgery for the eye. One is the type of the surgery which is done at the surface of the eye, like cataract surgery. And the other type of surgery is done within the eye at the retinal side. Because of high sensitivity of the eye, we cannot cut the eye to do the surgery inside the eye. And the surgery is done in a minimally invasive way. In minimally invasive eye surgery, the surgeon makes an incision at the surface of the eye and guides the instrument to the retina from that incision. This is a very challenging procedure. And for retinal surgery, we need superhuman precision. For example, the retinal vein has the diameter which is less than the natural hand tremor. So for some type of the surgery, there are physiological limitation for the surgeon to do the surgery. And on the other hand, because the retinal tissue is a soft tissue. We cannot feel the forces during the surgery. So what is the solution? When we talk about human limitation and the accuracy, the robots are the ideal solution. In my research, I'm working on flexible snake-like robots that can go through the eye to perform the retinal surgery. But because these robots are very small, we cannot have force sensor at the tip. And sensing the force during surgery is very important, because if we don't feel the force, we might damage the eye. And I'm using an indirect method for measurement of the force during the retinal surgery with flexible robot. In this method, I'm developing mathematical model to find the force with the deflection of the robot tip. Now, we have the force. The other problem remains here is how we are doing the surgery. For the second part of my project, I'm working on a control architecture to simultaneously control of the force and the position during the surgery. In retinal surgery, it is very important to keep the force at the minimum threshold to prevent damage to the eye. So by increasing the accuracy and precision during the surgery, we not only decrease the risk of the injury after the surgery, but at the same time, we can make some type of retinal surgeries to be possible, which are not feasible at the moment because of the physiological limitation of the human. One advantage of the robotic surgery is teleoperation. In teleoperation, the surgeon can perform the surgery through a distance. So when a disaster happens and the surgeon cannot reach the patient, like the situation that we are in this pandemic, the robots are of great help. So we can help us to keep the social distance during the surgery. The other benefit of the robotic surgery is decreasing the hospital stay. So we can have more space for the people who are in more urgent need during the pandemic if we use robot for surgical procedure. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
Our next scholar offers unique insight as veteran of international child welfare agencies and social activism. A PhD candidate in the individualized program, Zeina Ismail Alouche researches the life stories of individuals who have experienced transracial or inter-country adoption. Welcome, Zeina.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Faye. As you mentioned, I wear many hats. So as a protection expert who contributed to the formulation of the UN guidelines on alternative care for children, but also as a public health professional who worked with UNICEF and many international organizations at times of emergencies and pandemics, I feel very concerned with the fragility of the residential care system for seniors. We all know that Canada is moving gradually and prudently towards the confinement. However, Montreal is still climbing its way out of the COVID-19 storm. The transmission is declining, yet it's still relatively high. Only yesterday, 24 persons passed away. More than 1,000 seniors are still infected in 276 long-term facilities. Meanwhile, the efforts are focused on recruiting 10,000 caretakers, proposés aux bénéficiaires. Yet, the question that needs to be asked is whether this recruitment would really ensure a sustainable response to the crisis. Attempting to understand the root causes of this situation would require a revisit of the history of residential care that was established by the colonial mainly to deconstruct communities. In fact, many similarities between the situation of the CHSLDs and the realities of the residential care for children might be observed. First, avoidable placement. Second, high density within care. Third, the type of facilities that are hosting the seniors are mainly hospital, they're following the hospital structure. More focus is directed towards meeting the basic needs. And the most important factor that is really alarming is that the voices of seniors are not being heard, with a great concern around possible cases of abuse and neglect. In that sense, reforming the long-term residential care for seniors should also benefit from the worldwide effort to reform the child welfare system, while deinstitutionalization is the main focus. The current governmental attempts to establish some more facilities and to recruit more workers might not be the answer. It might be only reinventing the wheel. Reforming the services would require first an adoption of a strong doorkeeping policy to allow only those who are in real need for such service. Whenever placement is deemed needed, a home-based alternative should be made available. This means no big establishments, less bureaucracy, more monitoring and closer monitoring processes, but most importantly, a sustainable human bonding. History has taught us that the colonial mind that created the problem cannot be the same mind that would bring in the solution. Yes, Quebec has a growing number of seniors, yet the question is whether all those who are in care need really to be there. What if the money invested in creating more establishments is rather invested in supporting families to care for their seniors? Back to my research work on transracial and intercountry adoption, the same question resonates in my mind. What if the money invested in separating a child from the mother, community, culture, identity is rather invested in supporting families and communities to care for their beloved ones? Thank you.
Thank you, Zaina. That was very touching. A PhD candidate in electrical and computer engineering, our next scholar explores new optical devices for the next generation of fiber optic communications and the future of the internet. Please welcome Syed Mohammed Marjalili.
Thanks for the introduction. Have you ever thought about what the future of the internet will be? In the current pandemic situation, when all universities and businesses offer their services through the online platform, the demand for higher internet speed has been increased. Besides, in the near future, we will be using many new internet-based services in our life. For example, the sense of touch. This can be transmitted in our video calls. This type of services require transmitting a huge amount of data in a very short time. However, the current communication system is not equipped to cope with this. In the data communication system, the data of all internet users should be collected and transmitted through the optical fibers. All these data are carried by different patterns of light. The problem with this pattern of light is that they are mixing while they are transmitted through the optical fiber. So on the receiver side, we need to utilize a very complicated signal processing technique to separate the data of each user. This problem limits us to increase the internet speed anymore. In my research, I use an innovation which is called twisted light to carry the data. These type of light patterns are not mixing, so no more signal processing technique is required to separate the data of each user. It means that the data communication becomes much easier and faster. As a result, the internet speed will be increased up to 1,000 times. So in order to utilize the twisted light in the data communication system, the transmitters, receivers, and optical fibers should be upgraded. In my research, I'm working on designing a new type of optical fibers which support the twisted light. Light propagation in such fiber is a very complicated process. Finding an analytical solution is not straightforward and is very challenging. Therefore, I'm using artificial intelligence techniques to design of such fiber. If we use such devices in the data communication system, we can move into the future of the internet, making it possible to experience tactile internet, telesurgery, telepresence, augmented reality, and so much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Syed. Our next scholar's research has proved to be exceptionally relevant. A PhD candidate in psychology, Heather Harriet explores the role of self-compassion as a major factor in the physical and emotional well-being of senior citizens.
Hi everyone, thank you for the introduction, Faye. So my research focuses on how stress influences our health and what sort of psychological factors can help buffer the effects of stress on our health. So obviously with the start of the lockdown, there was an increase in stress, anxiety, and depression among most of the population, but especially older adults who are particularly at risk for complications from the virus, and as well are more likely to feel isolated due to the requirement that they stick to very strict social distancing measures. So one of the psychological factors that I focus on is self-compassion, which we know is going to be exceptionally useful for stressors that are uncontrollable. And what is more uncontrollable than a global pandemic? So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what self-compassion is, self-compassion involves treating oneself with the same kind and caring and compassion that you would treat a close friend or a loved one. So when you're feeling stressed, or for example, that you maybe can't keep up with the same productivity levels you had pre-lockdown, to be more self-compassionate would not to criticize or blame oneself for not being able to keep up with that, but instead try to be kind and understanding towards oneself. So my research has shown, specifically in older adults, that older adults who are more self-compassionate have less of the hormone related to stress, cortisol, and as well have less daily health problems and are less likely to develop chronic illness over time. So being able to maintain health in these times is particularly important. So some of the ways that self-compassion might be particularly beneficial for older adults experiencing stress. We know that older adults have been reporting higher levels of loneliness since the start of the lockdown. And one of the components of self-compassion is that of common humanity. So being able to recognize that we're all going through a stressful experience right now. It just may be manifesting differently for different people, and we truly are not alone in the struggles we're going through. So this can be important for older adults to utilize other forms of communication to maintain social support if they're needed to be isolated. So this can help them, connect with other individuals to share their struggles and hopefully feel less alone. Another important component of self-compassion that would be useful in the context of this pandemic is that of being mindful. So while it's okay to accept and acknowledge the experience of stress that you may be going through during this new normal, being able to be mindful of those feelings, but not ruminating excessively to a point where it just triggers more anxiety and depression. So with that, it can be perhaps best to limit things that may trigger these sorts of feelings, such as limiting news consumption and trying to engage in other activities that can help take your mind off what's going on and help you engage more in the present moment. So overall, I think my research is quite relevant, and that we should all try to be a little bit more self-compassionate during these difficult times to help us feel better, not only mentally, but also protect your health during these times. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all for sharing your insights with us today. You've touched on a range of important issues and raised many questions. With that in mind, I would like to introduce our moderator for the panel discussion, Bettina Forget. A PhD candidate in art education, Bettina is the founder of the Visual Voice Gallery an artist in residence with CETI, and the director of fine art at the Convergence Initiative. Bettina is also a 2020 public scholar and probably has a few questions of her own. Please welcome Bettina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, scholars, for the fantastic and very engaging presentations. As a public scholar myself, I'm always so impressed by my cohort and what everybody else is doing. We're so stuck in our own department bubble, so I know everything what everybody else is doing in art ed, but to hear what people are doing in mechanical engineering and in psychology is just phenomenal. So yes, we have a ton of questions, and I would like to take this moment to remind our audience that you are welcome to ask your own questions. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and then I will get to your questions as they come in. But to start us off, we have a couple of questions already, and maybe the best one to start with is one that would dovetail with what Heather just talked about, which is how we're dealing mentally with the COVID-19 crisis, because already doing a PhD is a really solitary pursuit. You know, there's a lot of stress and isolation associated just with doing the PhD. So what strategies do you all have developed to deal with the additional isolation that comes with the current pandemic? So I don't know who wants to start with this, maybe Heather, and then we can go around. Whoever wants to talk, just like throw up your hands. Oh, Heather, we can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry. So great question. I think what I've been trying to implement the most is be accepting of the fact you may not be as productive as you once were. And there's going to be some days where maybe you just really aren't feeling like working, and trying to force it can sometimes just make you feel worse and maybe be less productive. My supervisor has kind of a similar mindset, so he's been very understanding of that. And I think that's been helping me retain most of my sanity during these times.
Okay, I think Zaina, you would like to chime in?
Yeah, actually, when the whole situation started, I was embarking on my research interviews. So I was about to interview the individuals who experience transracial and inter-country adoption, and it's a sensitive topic. So I had a couple of discussions with my supervisors whether it would be possible to do that. How can I really be to take care of the interviewees, because yes, they are also confined, and yes, they have to remember all those stories. And I did them during this period, and I had to revisit all the ethics, not only the letter of consent, but my own ethics, how to address people, how to make them talk about experiences that are not nice, and also take care of them in the confinement space. So I had one response from any participant that marked my life. She told me, "Thank you for reaching out, because telling my story at this time of confinement is about giving me hope that someone will be able to listen to me." So it was touchy, it was amazing, and it was also a lesson to learn. So I'm in a way grateful for this period, because it allowed me to connect and establish bonds.
That's really a wonderful story. It's like your research is also supporting your own well-being, because you get to talk to people, which is great when you're in the humanities. But how about or to engineers? Your labs are closed. How are you dealing? How's your research going? I don't know if Sayed Mohammed, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Amir has his hand. I'm sorry, I have to like scroll beyond, across little tiny rectangles on top of my screen. So I'll try to see everybody. So Amir, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Actually, during this pandemic, I wanted to have my proposal defense. So I had trouble to set up my defense session, and then we figure it out that the only way that to have my defense is through video conferencing with Zoom or other type of software. So we finally did that, and it was successful. And from the engineering side of my research, in robotics, it has lots of theoretical work and also practical work. And because the labs are closed, so I have to come to some idea to fill that void. So I focus in more aspect and theoretical aspect of my work rather than practical during this time. So when the labs starts again, I can go forward with the practical aspects that time.
Yeah, we forget how much theory there's associated with engineering. Sharif, do you want to join us?
Yes, I just wanted to maybe follow through with Amir's comment, just to say that for me in the past 4 years or so in my program, I've been very ongoing, very involved in many committees, in many communities and so on. And of course, this has been very wonderful. But as the confinement came in, I started to realize that, I have so many experiences, and I've had very little time to reflect and to digest all these experiences. So for me, up till now at least, I've been using the time more to self-reflect on the experiences that I've had, on the knowledge that I've accumulated, and on ways to make this knowledge functional through writing, maybe through involvement in different communities in different ways, and so on. So I think it brings some space for some of our, some of the scholars that maybe are a bit more involved in their communities. It brings them maybe a bit more time to have a space on their own to reflect, and I think that's very important in the PhD journey.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it doesn't go, right? Thesis proposal, data collection, work. And now we have this imposed pause button, and it seems like you're making very good use of that extra time to reflect. What does anybody else using this sort of, not really spare time, but this unanticipated time in your research? Or since you have this unanticipated time, is this affecting your completion date? Do you feel like you now have to push back your roadmap? You think you may have to add another semester or another year to your PhD as a result of COVID? Heather, you look like you want to say something.
No, I've been in a very fortunate circumstance. Most of my data collection has all been completed, so I'm actually at a point where I can work at home quite easily and don't need the lab. So my completion date isn't affected currently. So.
Okay, that's really great. I hear that from a couple of my colleagues as well, that they're going like, phew, thank God my data collection was done and I'm not in the middle of it. Is anybody else bumping against deadlines, or is it all smooth sailing? You've got your data collection and you're just tucking into analysis and writing? Nodding all around. You are also you're doing so well. Shining example for the rest of us. I think what I heard you all address throughout your talk, and I think this may be the biggest question today, is how your research is now aligning with this new reality of COVID-19. And Heather and Zaina, your research areas are already super aligned with the realities of what we need right now. But do you feel like you're pivoting a little bit more to what COVID-19 realities, or is your path not that affected? Zaina, do you want to start us? Yes.
I have to confess that at the beginning, I felt like as if my topic has no more, not value, but it's not the time for it. And that was a bit distressing because I worked for long years in that field. I'm very much focused on child protection and reforming the alternative care sector. And then the story of the seniors and the crisis at the long-term centers arose, and I started to analyze the similarities and how, after all, it's the same structure and the same mind, and whether we are really meeting the needs or answering the needs of people or creating structures to divert the focus. And then I started to regain connection with my own research, but also in connection to other intersections with other research topics. I have always this vivid question in my mind: while technology is developing so fast, while the world was running, my main question: what about ethics? Are we moving in the same pace? Are we on the same wave? So this is now my preoccupation. So I focus a lot on ethical questions in everything we do.
So there's a slight shift based on what you are already doing. And I thought it was really interesting the way you approach this as like you're stepping back from your problem, you're asking a larger question about how do we need to reconfigure the way we look after those who need care and not institutionalize them and not, you know, impose the hospital system. So you're taking this opportunity to, you know, reconfigure the system. And I heard that even in other people's presentations, like Sharif, you as well, you were going like, well, sustainability is great, but I also suddenly see an opportunity to ask, you know, how this shift in focus is impacting health and well-being. So you also found a way to recalibrate your research question.
Thank you for pointing that out. Actually, for me, I don't see it more as a calibration. I think it's more giving us the opportunity to really see the interconnectedness of all these topics. So we've always, I mean, it's very easy to silo out, to say this is a health problem. We're expecting research outcome from doctors and you know, medical professionals and so on, and that right now everyone else should be on hold, or that we should guide all our questions on questions, for example, of spread and all that. And of course, this is information that's really needed. But it's also a time for us to really, read into the interconnectedness of stuff. So, you know, like the pandemic fueled a problem in the economy. It fueled a very big number of questions actually around real estate, especially commercial real estate that's now sitting empty. The opportunities that this offers for our cities. Questions on over-urbanization, are we building too much? All the standards that have defined our cities, you know, optimum indoor quality, optimum size, occupancy of an elevator. All these are questions that now are being asked that give us time to reflect, actually, you know. So I think it's not really about me shifting my research focus, but it's giving me an opportunity to highlight, you know, because one of the issues that I had, or challenges, or rather than issues, is when I talk to people about the 17 SDGs and buildings, and they say, well, what does, you know, questions of health have to do with buildings, or what does the question of gender or consumption and you know, sustainable consumption and so on. And now suddenly with this, you know, emerging health problem, we're seeing that all these issues are being touched upon every day in the media, in our conversations and so on. So it's really a very important you know, reflection for us to make at this point, and to read the connection between our life. You know, it's nothing happens in a silo.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I feel like when I was listening to all of you, you felt a little bit like revolutionaries. You were all like rattling, you know, at the cage, and like poking around and saying like, is the system working the best way it could? And how could my research, add to the larger picture and sort of, reimagine how we live, which is something I think PhD research does anyway. But now, given that we, like globally, we're hitting the reset button and we're rebooting, that makes everybody's research, gives everybody, like you said, this opportunity to reflect and, sort of get in there. So do you see yourself as revolutionaries, as public scholars, like, you're connecting to a very general audience? Do you feel that is your role as well? Who wants to, I'm trying to, yeah, Zena, go ahead.
I think it's a challenging question. I think it's a duty. It's a duty to be an advocate when we have the privilege of having a voice and being heard. So the public scholar program has offered us this amplification opportunity that we need to invest on and be the voice of the less heard. And in that sense, I can see that, yes, I'm approaching my research work not as a revolutionary, but mainly as an advocate. Yes.
Maybe Heather, how, because you're kind of advocating also for well-being that has a very large reach as a subject, as a public scholar, not just as a researcher, but as a public scholar, like how have you engaged with the public?
Sure, yes. I think there's been a growing conversation about the importance of mental health and providing access for that particularly. And as well, I think focusing on older adults has been largely overlooked in the mental health sphere. We're focusing more on just, younger adults or people going through specific stressors, but older adults tend to be neglected if we've learned anything from this pandemic. So trying to point out the importance of improving mental health in older adults is something that I think is really important, which is why I've continued to focus on that population in particular. And yeah, I hope eventually it can have more downstream consequences where we're, able to provide greater access to mental health resources, especially in these types of times. But of course, many mental health resources still tend to be quite cost prohibitive to most of the population.
Right. And I would like to take this moment to invite our audience again to send us questions. I think since we're streaming on Facebook Live, I think we can also ask questions there. Or if you are in Zoom, you just click on the Q&A, and I promise I'm keeping an eye out for that little tab. And if something lights up, I will definitely ask you questions to the public scholars. But I wanted to sort of move on to maybe a question. I don't know if that affects all of you. There is a lot of weird misinformation right now on the internet. I don't know how crazy your family and friends are. I have a few. And what do you feel is your responsibility as a public scholar to step in and sort of when conspiracy theories come on or COVID-19 deniers come and, blast on Twitter or on Facebook? Like, do you feel like you need to set the record straight? Because some of you actually have a lot of expertise in this area. I want to see who hasn't talked. Syed, Mohammed, do you want to speak to that? Do you have any? No, you have no crazes in your family. You're so lucky. I won't talk about mine. Sharif, how about you?
I mean, misinformation is like it's a constant, like every time there is a problem, there's always misinformation. In our daily life, there is also misinformation. So I think it relates to this idea as well that Zaina had discussed about and Heather as well, this idea of, not necessarily being an activist to stand against misinformation, but I think it's our role to point out people to right sources, or to credible sources, to not engage in misinformation. One thing I've learned as well is that you know, there's the saying that there isn't anything as bad publicity. So like sharing something with a critical comment sometimes, people might see the link shared, but not necessarily the critical comment, and it gives us more space for these misinformation to emerge or to grow, right? So so we have to be very careful when dealing with that. But also, you know, some people kind of feel more comfortable hearing certain information that conforms or confirms their own beliefs. So information and belief systems are also, you know, connected. So we have to be very careful when we're looking at that. But I think to reflect maybe on our work in the public scholar program, I would say that the well, first we're scholars, so we have academic venues to put out information that's more factual, that's more grounded. But the program has given us the space as well for more, you know, for spaces for us to be more, you know, open, more critical, maybe a bit to share more of our personal ideas or concepts regarding certain aspects. So I think it's important that the PhD students or scholars in general get this training about how to communicate to these different audiences and what kind of filters and language are needed in order to make a point that's valid and that's concrete and that's acceptable, you know, that gains the acceptability, I guess, of others as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of nods all around. Yeah. Actually, we have questions coming in now from the audience, and here's one for Zaina and Heather. So our attendee asks, what suggestion do you have for individuals who are faced with the question of putting their parents or elderly in long-term care, but are very wary of that right now? So who wants to tackle this first? Heather?
Sure. I think that's going to be a tough decision, but the best thing I can do is to really check in with how they're doing mentally and see if, you know, if they're going to be emotionally okay making that change, and as well the impact on you as well. Can't forget that giving your parent up to long-term care can be quite a stressful experience for both individuals. So trying to do all you can to cope with that stress in a healthy manner is what I feel I can comment on regarding that. But hopefully, Zina, I think you might have some more interesting insights.
Yeah, Zina, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. And personally, I cannot put myself in the shoes of others. And there is no judgment in that perspective. The main question for me is that whether the establishment, like the cartel of the service, are we promoting separation, or are we supporting families to care for their seniors? And this is the big question. It's a governmental duty to ensure that few seniors, go into the system. And when they go into the system, the type of care should be home-based, the same type, the same size, with sustainable relationship. We cannot have people who like, when we think about this proximity in the relationship, when we take care of a senior, there is privacy. So it cannot be someone who is passing by. It needs a bonding, it needs privacy, it needs trust, but most of all, it needs supervision, so we prevent any kind of neglect and possible abuse. I cannot advise individuals. I call for systems to ensure that people are kept at home as much as possible, and when they go into the system, they need to be respected as individuals, as human beings, and with long-lasting bonding and relationship building. Yeah, that's how I see it. We shouldn't put it on the shoulders of families who are faced in those situations. It should be on the shoulders of the government.
Yeah, so we need systemic change, basically, is what you're arguing for. Yeah, that's a very good point. I have another question from our audience, and this is from Michael Verwey. Michael asked, how big is the worry that this, and I assume he means the COVID-19 pandemic, will derail some aspect of your academic and professional careers? Is this something we will be addressing and explaining in future applications and steps? Or is this something that is global enough, or your pivot has been smooth enough that you're not missing any steps? Maybe Amir, do you want to speak to this? And you are muted, but like, do you feel like the pandemic is derailing your academic and professional career? And remember to unmute yourself. Okay, you're back muted. That's quick ones. Okay, you're good. Yes, go ahead.
Actually, during this pandemic, lots of companies has laid off the engineers. And unfortunately, there is no more job posting during this time. And at the same time, we have lots of students that have been currently graduated. So it's definitely will affect not just my future career, but also for lots of engineers who are expecting to graduate in the coming months, or who have already graduated. They have lots of problem to find jobs because there is no vacant job available for mechanical engineer or electrical engineer. I think in Montreal, for mechanical engineer at the moment, there is just 2 job postings. And right now I'm working part-time in a company, and I think maybe we have 150 applicants for 1 job posting in my company. And yeah, people are spending lots of time just reviewing the applications to see, which person could be suitable for this job. But yes, there are lots of people, gonna have problem after, not just this year, maybe in the coming years, because the effects of the pandemic is not something which we see at the moment. And if time goes by, we will see some other effects coming by. Because right now, there are some companies that have had projects from previous time. And because of the pandemic, they cannot get any job, any work done, maybe for the next few months. So that's definitely gonna affect the job market of the engineers from my point of view.
Thank you, Amir. Heather, you also had your hand up.
Yeah, so with regards to the derailing post-PhD careers, I've already somewhat felt the effects of that. I've been trying to reach out about potential postdocs, and I've been told there's currently a hiring freeze, so they're unable to make decisions at that time. So while I'm not necessarily looking to start for the next till 2021, but this is already going to have kind of a buildup of effect of people who were hoping to start postdocs in the fall are currently unable to, and then that'll increase competition for the next year. And there's already so few spots for postdocs that I'm obviously having to be aware that this could have an impact on what I need to be doing afterwards.
Yeah, good point. Sharif, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think maybe to just talk to complement what has been said. I think one of the biggest uncertainties that this brings about is the flexibility of moving or relocating for jobs, and this is kind of a fact for most academic situations where you'd probably be applying in or either for a postdoc or an academic position or so, and it would require relocating. And even if you're willing to do such relocation, it brings about a lot of uncertainty. There's no flights. Can you cross across the border if you need to go to the US? What about Europe? All these uncertainties are kind of out of your hands. So even if you're willing to take a certain risk at whatever level. This might bring about certain uncertainties. But also, I think another point that we have to be very careful is, we still haven't seen the full effects of how, the shifts in public spending are going to affect availability of funding for non-medical, research that's not directly or urgently needed for COVID-related things. And while we make the argument that everything is related, we still don't know if this effect is going to be needed. Are we going to be expected to reflect on COVID in our next year's round of applications for all PhDs? If it's not COVID, it's not funded. We don't know. So all these are questions that are a bit uncertain. I don't think we can, for me at least, it's hard to say whether it's going to directly derail, but it certainly poses some uncertainties. So it's important to consider it, I guess.
Yeah, very good point. Said Mohammed, you are in internet and we are all on Zoom right now. Are you in the best position of all of us for your future?
This COVID-19 actually somehow helped my research. Somehow focus, give the higher speed to my research, because right now everyone needs higher internet speed. The internet is the base of the others, it's base of everything. Having higher internet speed is very nice, helps everything else. And I think that this situation somehow helps my research to get more investment from the big companies to make the physical layer, because the physical layer of the internet communications, fiber optic communication should be upgraded, because the optical fibers is the in the data communication system, the optical fibers is the more expensive part of the system. And my research requires to upgrade the optical fibers, and maybe the companies doesn't want to invest such a huge money for that. This situation maybe somehow trigger them to invest more money on this type of research.
You're so lucky. As you were talking, and something reminded me of what Amir was talking about, because Amir, you were talking about how the robots could maybe also be used, help with doing the surgery remotely. And yes. So would you and Sayed Mohammed want to work together, since you would need excellent internet to reliably, run a robot that is poking in your eye right now? So actually, are some of your scholars connecting your research or your outreach or your work in any way? Like, have you worked collaboratively as a cohort as well, both in your research and as public scholars?
Although this research is very related, but they are very different. I prepared the subject, the physical layer, the basic opportunity for them, and they use the internet, something like this.
Okay, Amir.
Unfortunately, not because robotic surgery is a very broad field, and I'm focusing on the robotics side and mechanical side of this field. And developing algorithm for the control of the robot. But for the teleoperation, we need a high internet speed, which is the research of Mohammed. But there are some other people who work in between that can connect me and Mohammed. But yes, there are those robotic engineers who focus on the teleoperations side of robotic surgery.
Okay, so there's kind of a related question that has just come in from the audience, from Hamid Ibrahimi Orimi. and he's curious about if the public scholar work put pressure on you. He says, did this put pressure on the site and so you could freely focus on your research, or did the public scholar work kind of detract from your research? What was your experience? Zeina, go ahead.
I will speak on my experience during last year. I guess it was an amazing experience in grounding myself within my research, but also thinking about how my research is connected to the world, to the real world. And this is the most exciting part of it, because we researchers tend to work in bubbles, even if the research engage with people, but it's like the research focus and the PhD focus, etc. It's very, I would say I speak on behalf of myself, like it's very, in a way, selfish that I need to focus on this, I need to finish it. Yet it is like doing research is a tool, is an instrument to offer to people, to be able to contribute, to be able to help, to be able to meet a need. I think the Public Scholar Program reminded us that all what we do in research needs to connect. And if it's not connected, it means there is a problem with the research question in the first place. So yeah, this is how I see it. It was, for me, it was an amazing year, in fact.
That's fantastic. Sharif, go ahead.
Just to because I've been reading the question as well on the question and answer, and I think Hamid is also asking about the external pressures of COVID and how we're able to put these external pressures on the side and focus on our research. I think they were specifically talking about being away from family members or loved ones who might be in different locations around the world. And I think this is it's again part of the uncertainties that I feel, at least for me, before March or so, everything was so certain. I can decide to travel to that conference on this date, meet with this specific scholar, have a discussion, move forward, and plan, okay, I'll do the conference presentation, followed by the paper, followed by this, Now there's a lot more uncertainty. It does create some pressures, but I guess, you have to adapt. And for me, it was just a process of, taking it maybe day by day or so on. Of course, you have to make sure to take care of your mental health. And one of that aspects as well is to make sure that you keep your connections with family members, loved ones, through digital tools, or even now that things are opening up a bit, at least within your community, you can have some sort of meetings with the social distancing considered and so on. Of course, we're traveling abroad, and there's a lot of uncertainties for international students, and it's hard to predict, but certainly we're all looking forward for the moment that we can move.
Yeah, I so sympathize. We have time for one final question, and this is kind of to all of you. I wonder if you could reflect on what being a public scholar has done for you, and if you have any advice for the cohort that is coming in. So who has an idea? Yeah, Zeina, go ahead.
I apologize if I'm taking space. I just want to, before answering this question, I need to complete what Sharif has shared. I just want also to remind ourselves that in all what's happening within the COVID-19 crisis, we are still in a privilege. We are talking out of a privilege. We are here sharing a platform and talking and discussing. We are not the immigrant staying at the borders. We're not homeless. We're not. So we have also to recognize that privilege. It doesn't say that we don't feel the pressure, but at least also we have to acknowledge the privilege and try to use the privilege to assist others. And from that privilege, being a public scholar was a real privilege. And I encourage everyone who can do it to apply for it. People might think that it takes time, that it's an additional pressure, it deviates from the research work. Actually, it just reinforces the engagement with the research. So thank you for Concordia, and thank you for the program who accompanied us throughout this year. And thanks for the event as well.
Anyone else have some final thoughts on being a public scholar and advice for us incomings? Go ahead, Tyler. And then Amir.
Yeah, I think the whole public scholar experience has been really positive. All of the extra work even never really felt like work, because I felt like it was developing these useful skills that should already be implemented in PhD programs from the get-go. We really should be taught proper science communication, especially in times of, where many media articles tend to misconstrue research that's been published. I've seen that a lot going on with COVID. So I think being able to teach this skill so that the PhD students are able to communicate their research to journalists in a way that it gets portrayed to the public is really important. And I've noticed kind of the downstream effects in both my academic presentations regarding writing proposals, things like that. It's just really improved all aspects of my skills.
Okay, Amir, I'll let you have the final word before I have to pass it on.
Okay. From my side, it was a great opportunity to be a part of this year cohort, and it was a chance for me to share my research with public. Engineers spend most of their time in labs and writing papers, so there is not that much of chance for them to showcase their research to the public, and it was a great opportunity for me on this one. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to all the scholars for taking this time and for your presentations, your inspiration for us coming in. And it was wonderful to listen to you, and thank you for everyone who sent in the questions. And I will pass the baton now over to Faye, who's, I hope, on the call.
Thank you, Bettina.
Okay,
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bettina. Thank you, public scholars. On a personal note, I'd like to say that today I really got to know you because I jumped in my position almost at the end of your mandate, and wow, you make us proud. You really do. So thank you so much. So it seems the discussion is only beginning on this subject and on this ever-changing landscape. So if your question wasn't answered today, the conversation continues on social media. Please share your thoughts via the link on the chat box. Many of the ideas and challenges discussed here today are reflected in our broader community. Today with us to offer her perspective is the editor-in-chief of the Montreal Gazette, Senior Vice President of Post Media, and longtime Concordia supporter, Lucinda Chaudan. Lucinda, the mic is yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's taken part today. What an extraordinarily stimulating and timely discussion it has been. I think it's a tribute to everyone's commitment to public scholarship that we are here today at all, having this conversation, given the challenges that the pandemic has posed to all of us. And as we have heard so eloquently, some of the finest minds in the community are thinking about that and thinking their way around how their work can pertain and make a difference in the larger context. I was particularly delighted and impressed by the poise and thoughtfulness of the scholars in this kind of unusual environment and freewheeling atmosphere. Well done, all of you. It's about 4 years, almost exactly 4 years, in fact, that the Montreal Gazette first entered into a partnership with Concordia around the Public Scholars Program. When we did, we published an article that had the headline, "Some of the City's Finest Minds Coming to Our Opinion Pages." We still feel that way about the Public Scholars Program and the public scholars themselves. It's an honor to present the work of these really remarkable thinkers and researchers to Gazette readers. As we've heard over the last 60 minutes, their work could not be more relevant to what is going on in the real world. And at the end of our discussion, I have no doubt that every one of them will change the world in a positive direction in their own way. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for all the great work that everyone on this call is doing.
Thank you, Lucinda. Thanks very much for calling in. We really appreciate you being here with us. And I think on that note, we're going to outro. So on behalf of all of us here at ForSpace, I would like to thank you all once again for the presentations, all the ideas that you shared, your thoughtful comments. And I'd like to extend a very, very special thank you to you, Faye Diamanturi, who chose to celebrate her birthday in good company today with all of these brilliant graduate students and colleagues. So let me see if I can get this straight. Chronia Pola, Efrosini? There you go. I just tried a bit of Greek. And thanks all of you for attending the session. Bettina, great job moderating. You're a real pro. Already working hard as a public scholar, I see. Before you go, everybody, if we could borrow 1 minute of your time, please, to invite you to answer the survey that's being pasted in the chat right now that will also appear as you leave this webinar. We'd be very grateful for your feedback. Check us out, and check us out on social media and on our website to see what we're up to at ForSpace, at CU ForSpace. You can also access the video archives of all of our events, including today, on our website, concordia.ca/4, and on Facebook as well, where, as it was mentioned, the conversation can continue with comments and feedback there. On that note, I will say goodbye to everybody. Enjoy what's hopefully going to be a beautiful weekend. And again, we appreciate your time. We'll talk to you all very soon. Thanks for being here. Bye.